Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Masechet Megillah. We went back and forth. I was really distraught over which Masechet we should do after Masechet Ta'anit. And ironically, in the end, I wound up just choosing the Masechet that is after Ta'anit. So you kind of feel like sometimes, they say kiss, keep it simple, stupid. So sometimes it's literally as simple as that. And here we are. Now, it's important to understand what it is that we're going to be covering in Masechet Megillah. There's a very super technical beginning to the Masechet, okay? And afterwards, there's loads and loads of juicy goods to be able to kind of go through and ideas to be able to understand. But the beginning is super technical. So in order to do that, I need a piece of paper and a pen, because I have found that the best way to teach this is actually with a pen and two pieces of paper. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll show it to you guys live and as well on the screen. Okay. Okay, let's do it like this. And you know what? Actually, even better.
Sorry, Super Bowl boxes early.
By the way, we should totally do that too. We should do a Super Bowl game together and learn during the halftime. That would be sick. Elevate even the Super Bowl experience. So long as you don't have too many martinis. Okay? Let's go.
Only drink at night.
That's at night. Okay. Okay, let's begin. In this Masechet, also, we're going to see all the laws of Purim. Thank you very much. Sure. We're going to learn all the laws of Purim that are associated with the Megillah. We'll also start to learn many other things that come tangentially connected to Masechet Megillah, such as the laws of the Bet Midrash, of the Bet Knesset. It's not going to talk about ringing cell phones in this Masechet, so Sammy, you might want to leave now. What's it called? But at the same time, there are elements of Kavod Bet HaKnesset, there are elements about reading Sefer Torah, anything that is in any way related to Masechet Megillah and or to the connections that we'll have based on it is going to find its way into our Masechet experience. So let's begin. Megillah nekret biyud aleph, biyud bet, biyud gimel, biyud dalet, betet vav. A Megillah is read on the days, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th of the month of Adar. Excellent. Lo pachot velo yoter. Not less, i.e., not earlier, velo yoter, and not more, i.e., and not later. So you can't read it on Yud. You can't read it on Tetzayin, on the 16th day. So this is the window. The window is a 5-day window, okay? And that's why I've drawn right over here a little simple piece of paper, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You could all see it. These are the possible days that you might read the Megillah on. Now, what we're going to see is that the law of reading the Megillah is going to be divided and differentiated based on a few different parameters, okay? So let's get it clear. Much of this is not going to be relevant to you and me in our world. And I want to add one other thing. The other thing is that in a case of an extreme case, we're not actually limited to these 5 days. It can actually be read earlier. Let's say, as an example, Bar Minan, someone is going through a medical procedure and they can't make it on any of those days. So normally a person would think, the Mishnah says, not before the 11th day. So if it's on the 10th day, you're stuffed. There's nothing you could do. However, in cases of emergency, let's say, as an example, someone is going to Russia before the Iron Curtain fell down. So he's not going to be able to read Megillah on the 11th, 12th, 13th, but he's now in America on the 9th. The halakha is he could read and fulfill his obligation b'di'evid even before. This is what was a lichatechila b'di'evid situation. And we need 2 minutes to just explain what that means. Lichatechila means, again, it's interesting because that parlance, it's expressed a lot of times in the laws. When we talk about laws, there's something called lichatechila and there's something called b'di'evid. Does anyone know what those two words mean? Lechatechila means from the beginning. In fact, some of the Sephardic poskim, when they say that word, they don't call it lechatechila, they call it lekatechila. They use a kaf instead of a chaf, like it was in the beginning. In other words, in the first place, how should you do this? I'll give you an example. If one drop of milk falls into your kibbeh hamda, okay, Is it mutar to eat the kibbeh hamda by accident? It fell in one drop, whole pot, good or no good?
Lichat techila, you can't.
Lichat techila, you can't pour it in.
Right.
You're not allowed to pour it in. If you poured it in by mistake or it fell in, bidi avad means it was done. If it was done, so then what am I going to do? Now, there's a different halacha for bidi avad. So there'll be different laws for the bidi avad and for lichat techila. Okay? So let's take a look and understand these laws in their lichat techila, in their ideal states, and bidi avad in their non-ideal states. The Megillah is read on those 5 days, not more, not less. Cities that are surrounded with a wall from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Okay, who are we referring to over here? The person that takes over after Moshe Rabbeinu passes away and takes the Jewish people into Eretz Israel and oversees the conquest of the land of Israel. Kor'in b'tet vav. They read on the 15th. So any walled city reads on the 15th. Kfarim ve'ayarot. Sorry?
Does Yericho count?
Does Yericho count? Excellent question. Yericho is a walled city from the time of Yehoshua, but Yehoshua knocks down the wall when they walk around the wall. We'll see it when we learn the halachot of the walled cities. But excellent question. It was what I thought of when I first saw the Mishnah. The one example you got to think of is the city that the walls fall down, okay, during his time. Kfarim ve'ayarot gedolot korim b'yudalet. So any city, which is a big city or a town, they read on the 14th day. Ela she'akfarim makdimim leyom hakenisa. If you have a kifarim, so any village or any town, when should they read if they don't have that? If they don't have the walled city item for the 15th, ideal state would be that they read on the 14th, except that they always go earlier to the Yom HaKinisa, to the day of ingathering. We've actually had this Yom HaKinisa in Masechet. That's an easy answer because we only learned one other one together. Masechet Tanit. So anytime I say in Masechet, you guys know the answer is going to be Tanit. Unless I say in Masechet and I'm not asking you, in which case any of those are options. Okay. The Gemara says in Masechet Tanit that we fast on which days of the week? Monday and Thursday. Why? Because that's the Yom HaKinisa. That's the day that the people of the villages would come up to the towns and they would do their shopping, they would buy their goods, they would sell their goods, right? Because remember, the farmers are growing everything in the outskirts of the city. Then they're bringing everything to the town for the day of the shuk. But they're also buying the things that they need on that day. The other reason why they come to town on the second day of the Monday on the Thursday is because that was the day that they instituted the reading of the Torah. And why they institute the reading of the Torah on that day? Also because Monday and Thursday was a day where they instituted the Bet Din. So let's say David and Shlomo have a fight in Deal, New Jersey. Deal, New Jersey is not a major town. It's a farm town, maybe a long time ago. Now it's already built up. But they need to go to Brooklyn, because in Brooklyn they have the Bet Din, because that's where the community gathered in its larger numbers. So that's where they were able to afford. Part of this, remember, was financial. Because in order to have great rabbis, you need to be able to support those great rabbis. To have someone that was not working, was dealing with the communal issues, right? So where's his money coming from? It's coming from the people. To have people that were creating or learning all day to become rabbis to build a Bet Din, where did that come from? So you needed more people. Villages, by definition, they have farms. So each guy has a lot that's very, very big. So less people lived in an area that had much bigger. The towns, which had houses much closer, had much more of a population. Therefore, they had much more money. Therefore, they were able to support kollel, rabbis, yeshivot, Bet Din. And therefore, they had a Bet Din, and people would come for the Bet Din. So when we do something for the people of the village, it's always on a Monday or a Thursday. So if the 14th fell on a day that was not a market day, we're going to call it from now on a market day or ingathering day, even though the reason might be that they're coming for Torah or they're coming for a Bet Din to adjudicate a case that they have machloket between them and their next door farmer. Okay? Ketzad. The Gemara asked, Ketzad. Now watch. This is why I created this little sliding scale. Okay? Very, very simple. Here are the days of the week. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbat, Sunday. Okay? Now here's the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. These are the days of the month of Adar. Okay? The Gemara is now going to illustrate how it works out that you'll read on 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, I just want to give you a heads up, okay? Obviously, if the day that you're supposed to read is on the 14th and 15th, why is that? Take a look on the side for 1 second. You see that side, Torah or Hashalem. Lekayem et yemei hapurim ha'ele. The rabbis, the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah decreed, together led by Mordechai, that they were going to institute an obligation to read the Megillah for all times. Lekayem et yemei hapurim ha'ele bizmanehem. To fulfill the days of Purim in their times. Kasher kiyam alehem Mordechai Yehudi ve'Esther HaMalka. Kasher kiyimu al nafsham ve'azaram divrei tzomot zakatam. So they instituted this law that they would have to read. So once that law was instituted in the time of the Megillah, what days was it instituted on? It was instituted on in the Megillah to do it on Yom Ba'arba'a Asar Bo, on the 14th day of the and in the cities, in the city of Shushan, which was a walled city, B'chamisha Asar Bo. So it tells you in the Megillah 14 and 15. So these are the days. But we just told you 11, 12, 13. Answers the Mishnah already that the reason is because you might go earlier to achieve a market day. Okay, so simple. The Gemara is now going to ask, what are the actual eventualities that lead us to 11, 12, 13? Okay, so this is a simple hyper-technical thing that we're going to do with a sliding ruler. Okay, point of simple. Sorry. That's Masechet. Jokes. That's Masechet Pesachim. Masechet Pesachim, we have Ola Abba Asar when we check for the chametz, but that's a different thing. That's because the day of the Korban Pesach falls out on the 5th foot. No connection. Okay. Kabbalistically, there's a connection that all the time we find that 14 and 15 of the month is the strongest mazal of that month. So if there's something that's coming, why? Because the moon is fullest in the middle of the month. So the strength of the mazal of that month is strongest on when? The Ides of March, Sha'ani, okay? So there you go. Wow, fantastic. What an amazing occurrence. So that's why we're here. So the strength, as an example of freedom, happens on what day? On the 15th day. So the 14th at night is when they're doing the Korban. So on the 14th and 15th, we're always in a holiday mode. Sukkot also, same thing, right? So we find this idea in many iterations, but that's a Kabbalistic connection.
So irrespective of the day between 11 and 15th, Purim is still always the same day?
Purim is always on the 14th and 15th.
Got it.
Okay? So Purim, when we talk about Purim, we're talking about the 14th, and that's how we're going to start saying Chal Lihiyot, the day, the 14th day falls out on, okay? And it's going to be read in the 15th on the city in Shushan. And that's already in the Pasuk. The Mishnah is now telling you extra days. Just remember, how far is the maximum you could be from a in-gathering day? So as an example, if you're on Wednesday, you have Tuesday and Monday, okay? If you're on Monday, it's Monday. If you're on Thursday, it's Thursday. So if you're on Friday, you go back 1 day. If you're on Tuesday, you're going back 1 day. So what would the maximum you'd be? You'd think 2 days, because Tuesday, you have Thursday, from Thursday, falls out on Wednesday, you have Tuesday, Monday, right? So the problem is that actually what happens if it falls out on Friday? So where do we go? We go back Friday. You go back to Thursday. What happens if it falls out on Sunday? So you have Sunday, Saturday, Friday, Thursday. Right? So it's 4 days, but it's 3 days prior. So the maximum that you could be distance-wise is 3 days. So now the Gemara is going to figure out how 11, 12, and 13 are possible. And as I said, this is very technical, this beginning, but it gets easier once we move through it. Yes?
Is there a distinction between reading the Megillah and Chag Purim?
Excellent question. We're going to come across that as well. So when we tell you to read the Megillah on that day, does that mean you just read the Megillah on that day, but you do other stuff later? What's fascinating to note is that in Israel, there's something called Purim Mishulash. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced it. It's wild. It's Purim for 3 days. Wow. I don't know how my liver handled that, by the way, to this day. Sorry, I've done it. Yeah, you're reading the Megillah on this day, and then you have Shabbat in the middle, then you have the Purim on Sunday. It's wild, okay? But we'll see, we'll come across all these halachot and how they turn out. So the Gemara says, Ketzat, the Mishnah, Chal liyot Yudaled b'sheni. Okay, let's say the 14th falls out on Monday, okay? So let's make it this Monday. Okay, so when would everybody who's not in a walled city, when would they read? So what do? The big cities, it's a market day, no problem. Mukafot choma, that they always read on the 15th. When do they read? Machar, so they read on the 15th on Tuesday, easily enough. Okay. What happens? Ask the Gemara. Chal liyot b'shilishi or b'revi'i. What happens if the 14th falls on the Tuesday or the Wednesday? So what do we do for that? Chal liyot b'shilishi or b'revi'i. Kifarim makdimim liyom ha'kenisa. So they go backwards to Yom ha'kenisa. So if 14th is on Tuesday, they'll go back one day to Monday. That's reading on the 13th. What happens if 14th is on Wednesday? They go back to Monday. That's 13th, 12th. That's going back 2 days. So we have now a 13 and a 12. So within the normal week structure, if it's in 1 week, Sunday to Friday, to Saturday, so then we have a 12 and a 13 case easy. The Gemara now wants to try and figure out what's the 11 case, okay? What happens if it falls, the 14th day falls out on Thursday? So then the Kifarim and Ayarot Gidolot, the big cities, when do they read? They read Bo Bayom. Umukafot Choma, and the ones that are 15, right? Those, when do they read? They read the next day, Friday, no problem. Lemachar. Chaliyot Erev Shabbat. What happens if it falls, the 14th falls on Friday? Okay? So, what do we do in such a case? Because that's not a market day, obviously. When do they read? They read the day before. Where am I? They read 1 day before, that would be on the 13th. Those which don't have the problem of needing to be on a market day, right? When would they read? And they're a walled city, they would read Bo Bayom on the Friday. So what happens if the 14th now falls out on Shabbat? Okay, so what do we do if it falls out on Shabbat? Kefarim ve'erot gedolot makdimin. Everyone who needs to come up for the day of the marketplace, they would go back. According to Yom HaKenisa, they would read on the Thursday before. So how many days before is that? 2. From Saturday, going Friday and Thursday. So what do we have? Another example of 12. Mukafot Choma, and the Mukafot Choma that they always read the next day, the 15th. When should they really be reading? The Sunday. And that's what they do. They read Machar. Chaliyot Echad Shabbat. What happens if it falls, if the 14th falls out on Sunday? Okay? But this is where we have our case of Yud Aleph. Chaliyot, it falls after Shabbat. Kifarim Akdimim Yom HaKenisa. They go back to Thursday. That's our example. Count it backwards. What day is Thursday? 14th, 13th, 12th, 11th. So the 11th, sorry, it's not matched up over here. The Thursday would be the 11th. Those villages would go back to the 11th. Fayarot Gedolot. And the big cities, Korim Bo Bayom, they would read on that day, on the Sunday, Mukafot Choma Lemachar. And the ones that are surrounded by Mukaf Choma would read the next day. So again, the villages, they go back early because they need a day. Here they're split. In this case they're split. The Ayarot Gidolot, the big cities that don't need to come up, they read on their day, no problem, Sunday. Okay, and the people who read with the walled city, they read on the next day, which is what they always do, which is on Monday. So you have a scenario where you have 3 different readings going on.
I lost you.
Okay, let me just go through. This is why you need it. This is why we need this little sliding thing. One more time. The one example which we have, which is a little complicated, is the Sunday. So if 14th falls out on Sunday, okay? So is that a problem for the guy who lives in the big city? No, he can read on the day, no problem. What day would the guy with the walled city read? Next day. He reads on a Monday, no problem, okay?
Because you could also read on the 15th.
You also read on the 15th, okay? Now, what about the people in the small town that needs a market day? So he's now on Sunday. Where should he go? He goes back to Thursday. That's our example.
Go back to Monday also. Why can't he just do Monday also?
Why can't he do the next day?
Yeah.
So we always go backwards. We always make it earlier. We don't make it later.
But you just said the small city could go on Monday the day after, and since it's the 15th.
No. The walled city, that's its day. The walled city's day is the 15th always. So it reads on the Monday. Your mitzvah is not to read on the 15th, okay? So very clearly, walled city always reads the next day, so no problem. Sunday guys, big cities, reading Sunday. Walled city guys, no problem, reading Monday on their day. The only guy who has a problem is the guy from the small town. Doesn't have anyone to read a Megillah.
Why is big city reading Sunday? I thought it has to be a Torah day.
No, for the big city people, they live with the Torah and the readers. The only guys that need the market day are the guys that live in the village, they live in Deal. They don't have a guy to read for them. They're living in a farm town, so what are they supposed to do? They need to go back to so when did they go back? Count it backwards. Read them and weep. If Sunday is 14th, Shabbat is 13th, Friday is 12th, and Thursday is 11th. And that's our example of 11.
It's a small town,
Yeah?
and there's a minyan. And there's a guy who can read the Megillah. Why can't he read it on Sunday?
Why can't the
Why
guy...
have to go back from Sunday to Thursday?
So again, remember, the simple interpretation right now is that the reason why they're going is because they don't have that guy.
Got it.
So you're saying, what if they have that guy? Good question. We're going to see also other reasons where the other reasons are not going to satisfy what you just said, and therefore it would stay with the halakha. And we'll come back to this. This technical part is only in the Mishnah. Most of what we do now is not like this in Masechet Megillah, but in order to understand the range of days, we have to go through that. Okay, let's begin. Huge question.
What do you say?
Huge question. Some guy is visiting his uncle in the other town. But that's a question. That's a big question anyway. Like, that's as an example. I remember I was living in Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem is a walled city from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. Okay? Now, what am I doing now? Where am I going to go? I go to Telstone, which is another city, or I go somewhere else, which reads on another day. I'm there on that day. Do I have the halakha that I'm like the people of this new city or not? What happens if I go for the day to another city? Good question. We'll come back to that question when we learn the halachot that come to it.
What's the what's the significance of a walled city?
Oh, so the walled city, it's a very good question. I want you to ask me another question also about the walled city. The second question you really should ask about a walled city is, why is the cutoff point Yehoshua ben Nun? What in the world does Yehoshua ben Nun have to do with the story of Purim? Okay, so there's two answers that are given to this. One answer is a super sensitive answer. The answer is that in the pasuk they gave Shushan Abirah a different categorization. Okay, because they read the Megillah on the 15th day. Okay, and we'll see exactly why. What that would mean is that the cities in Chutz La'aretz that had a special designation of being a walled city would be given a different halakha than the cities that used to be walled cities in Jerusalem. And remember, they were living in a time when the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was right then. Right? And by the way, they were going to go back to Eretz Israel in just a minute. Right after the story of Purim, pretty much, they wind up going back to Eretz Israel. They were always sensitive that Eretz Israel should not have less of a halacha or less of a status than Chutz La'aretz. So it reminded them that the cities that they lived in, the walled cities had been burned to the ground. So what did they do? They instituted that the law is not dependent on now, the law is dependent on Yehoshua. The second thing is a more like boom answer, which is that the first time that we wound up meeting this people, this arch enemy of the Jewish people called Amalek, is under the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Yehoshua fights Amalek. Haman is a descendant of Amalek. So therefore, when do we decide it by? We decide it based on the first time. Now, everyone sees this idea and they're like, okay, that just sounds like a random, okay, he fought against Amalek before, now he's fighting against Amalek now, Azaku Baruch. I think there's something else here, and I think that this is something that people don't quite understand. Because really, is that the first interaction we have with Amalek? No.
Over the sea.
That's Yehoshua. Moshe sends Yehoshua to go fight them.
Oh, okay.
When do we have a...
Moshe.
Sorry?
Right after you accept the sign. Right after you accept the sign.
Yaakov.
Those are Yehoshua. Yay! Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov runs away, right? Who chases after Yaakov to kill him?
In the class now.
Keton and Pasim.
That's a top one, right?
Keton and Pasim, right? Always delivers. Not just Gemarot,
I knew
Chidushim.
Bereshit and the couple after that, but that's where it ended.
Okay, yeah. What's it called? I remember. You want to laugh? There's the art scroll has the big Tanakh and it has the individual Bereshit Shemot, all the different ones, right? And the small thin ones,
sure.
right? So I remember that in my father's school. So they brought out all the little ones. So the guy said, "Why are we doing the little ones?" I said, "What's the problem? It's just easy to hold." Why? He goes, "When I'm in the big one, he goes, I feel like I know the book because I know some of it. But if you'd separate them, and I get Shemot, I don't know the whole book. I don't know the whole Vayikra. Because at least in the other book, I feel like I know something in the book. I was cracking up. You have some people that logic is irrefutable in their world. Okay, let's come back to this, because I think that this is very interesting. I think there's another element here. So why Yehoshua? Yaakov already. Let's make it walled cities from the time of Yaakov Avinu. One answer is that the chashivut of Eretz Yisrael doesn't start by Yaakov Avinu because it wasn't conquered for the Jews yet. So this idea of the first answer really relates more to the Jewish people living in Israel as their bequeathed land, if you will. But there's a much deeper way of seeing it, okay? And that is Yaakov, in that interaction with Amalek, doesn't defeat Amalek. Yaakov, in his interaction with Esav, doesn't defeat Esav. It's only Yehoshua that it says, V'yahalosh Yehoshua Amalek lefi charev. So here we're celebrating a vanquishing of Amalek, but we're celebrating it when we're in a foreign land, when our land lies in ruins. So what do? We illustrate that this machloket, this fight between Amalek and the Jewish people, is an epic fight, and it has to do with the Jewish people's arrival in Eretz Yisrael, with the Beit HaMikdash, with the conquering, with the return to Eretz Yisrael. So what do? We set as a time marker for that, the walls that were up in the time of Yehoshua, when Am Yisrael was in the powerful state of being able to come and take Eretz Yisrael. So that Amalek, which is going to be a fight, as the Pasuk says, dor, till the time of Mashiach, that's how we set our minds about the machloket, about the fight between the Jewish people and Amalek. We're going to come back to the ideas of the walled city of Shushan when we learn those halachot as well.
The cutoff is after Yehoshua or before Yehoshua?
In the times of Yehoshua, which leaves us with the question of Yericho, and we're going to come back to that when we come back to the stories but Yerushalayim don't get destroyed in the time of Yehoshua.
But it's not built until David.
No.
It's after.
Yes, those walls are built, but at the time, almost all these cities were walled cities. Yes.
Okay.
If it's Friday, the big cities and walled cities read on the 14th. There's no next day, right?
If it's no, Shabbat is always a no-go, and the reason why it's a no-go, as we know from other places, Masechet Sukkah, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, right? In Masechet Sukkah, we don't do a lulav on Shabbat. Masechet Rosh Hashanah, you don't do shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Why? For the same reason, because we're worried that someone will take it to carry it to the rabbi to learn the halachot about how to do it. Okay.
Friday, if it's Friday, because then Shabbat is the 15th, so there is no 16th then. So the walled city reads on Friday. They don't advance a day.
They don't advance, and there's never going to be a 16th. And we'll see as well in the Gemara how come we don't go past that point. It's also going to be from the pasuk. Okay, says the Gemara.
Rabbi, so the 11th, 12th, 13th is strictly for the villages.
Yes, those added days are only for every other scenario. You're always doing on the 14th or the 15th. The only reason why we talk about earlier days for market days are because of that. However, in a scenario where Purim would fall out on Shabbat, we would have 11, 12, 13 for everybody. Right? Why? Because you'd have to make it earlier. Because you can't do it on Shabbat. But how could you do it earlier? You're not allowed to do it earlier. The answer is 11, 12, 13. So the making it earlier of on Shabbat is not because of the market day. It's because you can't do it on Shabbat. But how do you know that it's a day that you can read the Megillah? Because we're going to have a limud that's going to tell us that 11, 12, 13 are viable days. Okay? Is that clear?
Yes. I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry. How come Megillah gets so many days you can make it up? No other.
Excellent question. We're going to come to that as well as to why we added these extra days in other things where we don't add you like extra days. Like it had to be some flexibility if we were able to tell you, do it on the market day. What we should really tell you, tough, make the trip.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Right? Why don't we just say,
Right.
like anything else? You don't say Hazit, the guy, Korban Pesach on the 14th. He's not anyway going to the shuk. So you know what? Let's just make it earlier. So it had to be that there's a reason why these were all viable days.
After the Tanakh, right?
Okay, yes, after Tanakh. So
Although other holidays are from the Torah.
Chanukah.
Yeah, not as stringent.
I'm just saying there are other things. Okay, that we just tell you, do it now. Okay.
I have one more question.
Yes.
It's a silly question.
The only silly question is the one you haven't asked.
What is the Gemara stone on page 2?
Excellent question. The Gemara starts on page 2 because a person.
Oh, we accomplished already page 1. We got past it.
So a person should think that they already started. That's a nice one. One of the reasons that they say is because they always started on page 2, that a person should understand that there's always something, even if you covered everything, there was something that came before, right? There's always more to be able to learn. So even if you learned the whole book, you still didn't learn the whole book. So someone said, why don't we add an extra one at the end? I said, because that's the end of the book. It would not be obvious that there was an extra one. Right. Okay, fine. Let's move on. Gemara. Megillah nekret biyud aleph. Megillah is read on the 11th day. Minalan. How do we know? Minalan kideba'inan lemem lekaman. What do you mean minalan? As we will be required to say later on. Chachamim ikilu ala kefarim liot makdimim. The chachamim were lenient. Super important word there. Super important word. What does the word hikilu mean? They were lenient. That means that this is not the way it's supposed to be. We decided to be lenient. That means that it's not an ideal decision. We had to come up with some leniency for this. Hikilu ala kefarim liot makdimim, to go earlier, liyom ha'knisah, to the day of ingathering, kidei sheyisapku ma'im mazon la'achihem shebekrachim, in order that they should be able to bring water and food to the people, to their brothers in the kirachim, in the villages. Okay? So right off the bat, the Gemara says, you think that it's only because they don't have someone to read the Megillah. We needed them to not be busy on the day where everyone's having Purim parties and they need food to be able to have the Seudah and to do Mishloach Manot. We needed them free, these farmers, to be able to provide for everybody. So therefore, if we keep them busy on the 14th doing the mitzvot of the day, they're not helping everybody else with what they need. So therefore, that's why we did it. Which answers your question from earlier. What if I have a reader? The answer is we don't want you busy with that on this day. We want you to do it earlier so you can be doing something else on Purim.
Town, they heard the Megillah, they bought their goods, went back to the villages, and they had the festival.
Correct.
The feast.
They had the feast on the 14th, but everybody else had all the things that they needed for the Ekel. I remember a guy came to me, he says, Rabbi, am I allowed to work on Purim? Are you allowed to work on Purim? So I said, there's no isur for working on Purim. I mean, of course, there's mitzvot of the day that you have to do, but it's not isur to work on Purim. I said, what do you do for a living? He says, I own a grocery store. I started laughing. He said, what are you laughing for? I said, well, you should join our Gemara Masechet. No. I said, open up Megillah, page 2, read it if you need to read it in English, and then you'll tell me why I'm laughing. The whole of Masechet Megillah begins by arranging that the guy who helps everybody get the food for the Seudah should be free on the day of Purim to be able to give them what they need. So you're asking me if it's mutar when the Gemara Megillah makes special dispensation so that you should be able to do what you're asking me to do? Anyway, it was a rabbi joke. Okay, let's move on. Rabbi jokes are less funny, except for rabbis who find them more funny. Okay, let's move on. Gemara says as follows. Okay? Anan hachi kamrin. The Gemara says, no. You thought I was asking you why is what is the reason for it? Minalan, what's the source for it? And you're going to give me an answer as to why we're doing it. I wasn't asking why we're doing it. Hachi kamrin. This is what I was trying to say. Michti kuli anshe knesset hagdola. All of these dates, anshe knesset hagdola tikninu. They must have instituted them. Who are the anshe knesset hagdola? The men of the great assembly. That is a group of scholars. Anshe, men. Knesset, gathering, Hagdolah, the great one. Who is that? That starts in the time of the last prophets. So just so we have a timeline, when do we have the period of the Nevi'im? So if you open up a Tanakh, Torah is Moshe. Handoff, okay, to the running back, Yehoshua, who penetrates the defense and gets in touchdown into the land of Israel. That begins, Yehoshua begins the portion of Nevi'im. So Tanakh, the Nun is Nevi'im. When does that stretch to Nevi'im until Ketubim? What's the last of the Nevi'im?
Yeshaya.
Sorry?
Yeshaya.
Okay, so we have all the way till the end, you have Ezra, Nehemiah. They are after all of the previous ones. They span, now remember, so Yehoshua comes into the land of Israel. Ezra and Nehemiah are the last prophets that are there at the end when they rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so Ezra goes back up. When does Ezra and Nehemiah with his partner go back up to Eretz Yisrael? After the story of Purim. Who gives them permission to go back to Eretz Israel? The child of Achashverosh with Esther is Koresh. You have Koresh and Daryavesh. So Cyrus and Darius. By the way, Jewish Persians have the name Cyrus and Darius. Why? Because the Persian Jewish king, sons and grandsons of Achashverosh with Esther are called Cyrus and Darius. They give them permission to go back into the land of Israel. So Darius is a very special name, especially for Giants fans today. Bezat Hashem, Slayton does loads of great things in the touchdown as well, in the merit of... Okay, fine. So the idea, my friends, is that Ezra and Nehemiah now get permission by a Jewish Persian king. Most people don't know that. There is a Jewish king who's ruling the whole flipping civilized world.
Do they know that?
At that time.
Do the people know that?
Do the Persians know that? Yes, because Esther in the big reveal reveals that she's actually Miss Jewish USA. Okay?
My father's
in the
name
contest.
is Cyrus, and my uncle's name is Dariush.
Darius, there you go. Perfect example we have over here. Do you have any... I just want to tell you, that's fantastic. You have an uncle, Cyrus, Darius, father. Just stay away from any cousins called Haman. Okay, the what's it called? The Gemara is telling us effectively. Gemara is telling us that at this time, Anshe Knesset Agdolah, so it spans from the last of the prophets, okay, all the way down to the Tanaim. When is that? The last of the prophets, the ending era of the prophets, when the Jewish people go into exile, into Babylonia, into Bavel, under Nebuchadnezzar, then Belshazzar, then Belthazzar, right? And then you go into Achashverosh, and you go into all the kings in first Babylonia, then gets taken over by the Persian Empire. Okay, Xerxes, according to many opinions, was Achashverosh. Someone asked me, how could Xerxes be Achashverosh? If you pay attention, that double consonant sound, Xerxes is Achashverosh. Okay, that double shin is because it's a soft X in ancient Persian. So many opinions that was the king Achashverosh. Okay, now be that as it may, Anshe Knesset Agdolah spans all the way into the Jewish people going back to Eretz Israel, rebuilding the second temple, all the way through to the beginning of the Mishnayot that we see in Pirkei Avot, where we start saying, this guy, Shimon HaTzadik, Mishayareh, he's from the end of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. So it spans all the way. And when do we start moving from the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah? We have the group of people called the Zugot, which are the two Tanaic rabbis that operate in tandem. Who is that? That's the Nasi. So the grandson, the prince, would be the great-grandson from the Davidic line through, what's it called? Who are famous Nisi'im that we know? Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Who else? Hillel HaZaken comes from there. Okay? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel. These are all descendants of King David. Okay? So they become the Nasi, and they are twinned with an Av Bet Din, who's the second Zug, who's the second partner in that Zug, in that pair. So from the pair, we then go into Yossi ben Yoezer, Yochanan Shtreda, all these pairs that we find in the beginning of Avot. That's Anshe Knesset Agdolah. They were a Bet Din that did not live at one time, but spanned a very, very long time, over 100 years. Okay? So the Gemara says, the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, which was the legal body that was governing the Jewish people at the time of Mordechai, they got together and they made this decree that there would be a mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. Is Megillah a mitzvah from the Torah? Obviously not. It's a mitzvah midrabanan. Okay? So they were the ones that decided all of these days. How do we know that they decided 11, 12, 13, 14, 15? Because if you would think that the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, this great assembly, they decided Yud Daled and Tetvav, like the Pasuk says in Masechet Megillah, Takun, Atu Rabbanan ve'akre takanta de takinu. Anshe Knesset Agdolah, could further later rabbis come and undo what had already been done by the Bet Din of the Anshe Knesset Agdolah? Impossible. V'atanan, we learned in the Mishnah, en Bet Din yachol levatel divrei Bet Din chavero. A Bet Din is unable to undo the words of a prior Bet Din that was its friend. Ela im ken gadol mimenu, unless it is bigger than that Bet Din, b'chokhmah, in wisdom, u'b'minyan, and in numbers. So let's say you have a Bet Din from a generation prior. They say this is the halacha. The Bet Din next generation says we don't like that. Could they undo what the other Bet Din said? No. Okay? What happens if they are wiser than the generation before? Which is very rare. It does happen in history a couple of times, but very rare. Generally, we're on this decreasing, as we move further and further from Har Sinai, we're getting less and less knowledgeable, okay? But let's say there was a Bet Din at a later time that was wiser than a prior Bet Din. Still can't overturn it.
Who's to say that they are?
They'll know that they are. Okay? Now, if, as an example, they're wiser, they still can't overturn it. It needs to be more and wiser. So they need, if that was a Bet Din of 23, this needs to be a Bet Din of 24. Okay? They need to have more and wiser. Other examples, again, like I said, it's very rare.
And everyone
When
of
else?
them need to be ego hungry and not humble.
No, the opposite. If they're ego hungry, then they're not valid as judges in the first place.
So then how could they? You would
No
think
ego
that they would.
and rich.
Ego does not mean that you lie to yourself about how big you are. Ego means I know how big I am, but that doesn't make me a proud and arrogant person, right? Now, as an example, there were generations where because of what happened, there was no Torah learning. The people are being driven, they're being tortured, so they don't have the time to study on the same level as the people in the generation after that are living in safety. So you can imagine a whole generation of people that lived through what went on in Germany, as an example. They didn't have time to learn. They were busy staying alive. Right? Hi, staying alive. Then they got here. Now there was time to be able to learn. So maybe they have an opportunity to be able to do more. Okay? So that would be a scenario, but it happens very, very rarely. By the way, this law is not only true in another generation, because I said in the word a later Bet Din, but no one corrected me. I wanted to see if anyone picked it up. It just says in Bet Din, mevatel Bet Din chavero. It doesn't say in Bet Din me'uchar, later, that could undo the, even if it's a Bet Din down the block. Once a Bet Din rules, another Bet Din can't undo what the other Bet Din, even if down the block, unless they're bigger than them and more numbers. Okay? Fascinating tidbit on the side. One of the Mefarshim tells us something incredible in your favorite character in Torah, Yosef. One of the questions is, why does Yosef not tell Yaakov what happened when the brothers sold him?
Because he doesn't know they sold him. We went over this.
That's one opinion that Ashbam. Beautiful.
Hit the rabbi again.
Beautiful. That's
back.
well, sorry?
He didn't want Yaakov to curse them.
One opinion is he didn't want to upset him. Another opinion is he didn't want Yaakov to curse them. Excellent. But there's another opinion that's brought down in Rashi from the Chachamim from Chazal, and that is that when they sat down to rule on the halacha of what should be done with Yosef, they gave a psak halacha as a bet din, and at that court case, they made a cherem, they ruled that no one was allowed to tell Yaakov. But bet din's ruling applies to whoever bet din applies that ruling to. And they applied that ruling to everyone. So Yosef was not allowed by the psak of bet din, of a minyan, to tell Yaakov about what happened to him. Who else was affected by this? Yitzchak as well. Yitzchak, it says, nu b'nevuah, but was prohibited. But the wildest version of this, the Gemara says, is that who else did they forbid to tell Yaakov? They forbid God from telling Yaakov. Now, if you think that that's crazy, where else do we have this idea? We say on Yom Kippurim, Ukeshem, and just as the Bet Din, Shel Mata, the Bet Din down here on earth, allowed us to pray with all the sinners on Yom Kippur night, so too should they agree in the Bet Din Shel Mala. Because God gave us the Torah, and He told us, you're going to decide the rules. We learned this from the Pasuk, Lo b'shamayim. It is no longer, once the Torah was given to us in this world, we rule, we make the laws. And even if God knows that this is the day of the month that it falls out on, we could say down here on this earth, no, Rosh Chodesh is tomorrow. The human beings didn't see the moon on this day. They didn't come to Bet Din on time. We changed our day of Pesach. We changed what day Yom Kippur is. Because Lo b'shamayim He. And we have fascinating examples, Tanur ben Achinai, Bet Achinai, of this idea of Lo b'shamayim He, that we have the power to be able to institute these laws. So a Bet Din is capable, you find, of instituting laws, and that becomes the mandate. So you see, we ask a question, why didn't Yosef just undo? The answer is, because even though he had a Bet Din, him, Menashe, Ephraim, and maybe even he could consider himself bigger than the Shivatim, but were the other two bigger than the Shivatim, Menashe, Ephraim? Probably not.
So
Even if they were equal. Because the pasuk says, Reuven v'Shimon, Ephraim and Asher will be for me like Reuven v'Shimon. That means that Yaakov says that they're the same. It's not good enough to be the same. So they don't have more, and they also don't have numbers. Okay? So he can't undo it, so he can't say, he can't revert.
So you
The
said-
fascinating insight on this as well. Yes.
Menashe and Ephraim were the Beit Din.
No, that would have been the Beit Din to undo it, but like we said, you can't undo the law of another Beit Din just by being a Beit
So
Din.
who's the Beit Din?
The Beit Din was all the brothers.
That's what I was gonna say. Oh, of course, all the brothers are gonna get up and say, "Don't tell Dad what we did." By the way,
They're guilty.
Yeah. You know what I always loved about this Chazal?
Self-serving.
What I always love about this Chazal? What I always love about this? What do you see? That they were right.
Yes, they were right, of course.
what do you mean?
They would have destroyed the father.
If they were wrong, then God would not be bound by the incorrect psak of a Beit Din. So the psak halacha was actually, it wasn't wrong. The way, en la dayan elama she'enav ro'ot. A judge has to rule based on what he sees. Like as an example, in the legal system, let's say someone comes into court and he gives inadmissible evidence. Wait, what do we say? Strike that from the record. That cannot be used. If something is inadmissible evidence, it's not used to come to a conclusion. So a dayan, all he rules on is what he actually sees. The brothers did not know what was going on in Yosef's heart. So therefore, what did they do with that information? They discarded that information. We can't know. So what we're looking at looks like a case of rodef, of someone who's chasing someone else to kill them. The halacha is, you get up and you kill them first. Their ruling was correct, and therefore it was binding even on God. If it was done out of a place of ego, if it was just, okay guys, don't let us get in trouble, then it would not have bound anybody. So Chazal's expression teaches us that their psak halacha must have actually been correct. And as the brothers correctly say later, what are they punished for? For the lack of mercy and compassion they have when Yosef is crying, and they don't say to themselves, even if we're right in halacha, how can we do this to our brother? Okay? Let's finish off. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, so then all of these days have to come from the Anshe Knesset Ha'Gedolah. Because we can't have a scenario where Anshe Knesset Ha'Gedolah said 14, 15, and then some other random Beit Din is like, well, 11, 12, 13 also. Because they couldn't do that. They wouldn't have the power. So therefore the Gemara says, if that's the case, so where do we find that the Anshe Knesset Ha'Gedolah said all these days? Because if they made up all these days together, why would they go in the Megillah and only tell us about 14 and 15 if they also meant 11, 12, 13? Amar Rav Sham bar Abba. Rav Sham bar Abba says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and then Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kra, the pasuk says, L'kayem et yemei Purim ha'ele, to fulfill these days of Purim, bizmanehem, in their times. Says the Gemara, Zmanim harbe tiknu lahem. They allowed for multiple, plural times. Okay? Now, what are we trying to say here? What should it have said instead? It could have said, L'kayem, to fulfill the mitzvah, bizman. Or even bizmano. So a single version of, like as an example, let's say you're allowed to do your taxes on the 14th and the 15th of December. And I said, make sure you turn your taxes in on time. On time means more than one day. So it could have said bizman. Why did it say bizmanehem, plural? To tell you that there's more than one time for the Megillah.
So in the Megillah, it says the sentence.
It says, bizmanehem, in the Megillah itself. That's the pasuk you see on the side that we saw earlier, okay? The Gemara says, hi, you're telling me that you're using it to tell you this lesson. We need that already to understand it for itself, right? Im ken, says the Gemara, lema kera zeman. If it's just trying to tell you that you have to read it on time, it could have said zeman. Mai zmanehem, zmanim tuva. There are multiple times that a person is able to read it. Ve'akati mibayle, says the Gemara, we still need this extra hem, this plural, to tell you zmano shel zeh, lo kezmano shel zeh. Is a 15 guy allowed to read on 14? No. Is a 14 guy allowed to read on 15? No. So therefore, we had to say bizmanehem, because when you say turn it in on the 14th and the 15th, I say turn in your taxes on time. Both of them are as good as each other. They're both the time. But if I tell everyone, make sure you give, if 14 guys have to do taxes on 14, they can't do on 15. 15 guys can't do taxes on 14. What would I say? Make sure to turn it in your respective times. I'd have to illustrate that halakha by saying the Gemara says, I need that to teach me this halakha. Zmano shel zeh lo kizmano shel zeh. The Gemara answers, Imken, if that's true, lemakra zmanam. The pasuk could have said multiple zmanam, which would tell you their times plural. My zeman nehem. Zman nehem is still extra letters that it's telling you, it's hinting dumya dizmanam. It's telling you times similar to the plural times that we just discussed. Ma zmanam tre, just like zmanam is 2, af zmanehem tre. Also, the additional days that we're adding through the hint of zmanehem is also going to be 2. So it's double, it's similar to the original takana, which is 14-15. We gave you another 2. Ve'ema tresar v'tlesar. If that's the case, so all you gave me was 2. So I should tell you 14-15 good, 13-12. I got you. But what about 11? Kedamar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak. Shmuel bar Yitzchak says Yud Gimel Zman Kihila la Kolhi. Yud Gimel was a time of gathering for everybody, because on the day in the Megillah itself, when it says that they were given a time to gather together to defend themselves against the enemy, what day was that? Yud Gimel. So obviously Yud Gimel is going to be a valid Megillah day, so therefore it doesn't need an extra pasuk. So Yud Gimel is literally, easy way to remember it, Yud Gimel is a gimme, okay? I moved to 12 and 11 to give me the extra 2 because of Zmanehem. Zman Kihila la Kolhi, v'lo tzarich l'rbuye. You don't need it. Hachanami here too, Yud Gimel Zman Kihila la Kolhi, v'lo tzarich l'rbuye. Frek the Gemara. Es the Gemara says the expression in Arabic. Ve'ema, how do we say, how do we know to go, sorry? How do we know to go to 12 and 11? Who told you to go backwards? This is Ketonat Pasim's question from before. Ve'ema shitzar v'shivsar. Maybe we go to 16 and 17, because you have 14 and 15. Maybe you should go 16, 17. The Gemara says, Velo Ya'avor. The Gemara says the pasuk, when it tells us 14th and 15th, it says Velo Ya'avor. And you should not, Lo Ya'avor literally means don't transgress. But Lo Ya'avor also means don't go over. So if the Gemara, the pasuk says 14, 15 don't pass, therefore we know that we can't go past that day to do any day after that. If that's the case, where do we have to go? Earlier. V'lo ya'avor ktiv. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani learns a different understanding. Amar kera. The pasuk says, "Kayamim asher nachu behem haYehudim," like the days that the Jewish people rested. Yamim kayamim lerabot Yud Aleph Yud Bet. So kayamim, like the days that they rested, indicates that there's 2 extra days that we're able to read the Megillah, and we add 2 more days. Yud Aleph Yud Bet. Ask the Gemara same question. What about, why 2 days does that give us Yud Aleph Yud Bet? It should give us 12 and 13. And we don't need to add it because it was already a gimme, because that was the day that the pasuk itself says that they gather. That's obvious that has the energy of a Purim type day. What about 16, 17? It doesn't, it says Lo Yavor, you don't pass it. The Gemara now asks the only obvious question. Why are they arguing on each other? How come the first rabbi, Rav Shemen, he learns it from, from the pasuk Zmanehem, Zmanam, Zmanehem, and the second rabbi learns it from Kiyamim, like the days? The Gemara answers, he doesn't like that whole game. That there's extra bits. Once you're going plural, so say it how you say it. Maybe that doesn't teach me that there's extra days in there. Rav Shimon bar Abba, my tamelomar mikiyamim. How come he doesn't learn it from the word that says kiyamim? Amalecha hahule dorot. Let's look at the pasuk one more time. Okay, of kiyamim. Look to the side. Where number Gimel on the side where it brings the Pesukim, Kayamim asher nachu b'hem haYehudim, like the days that they rested from their enemies, ve'achod asher nepach le'me'or gol l'simcha, and the month that turned from sadness to joy, me'ever liyom tov, and from mourning to holiday, la'asot otam yimei mishteh v'simcha. So what the pasuk is telling you is, I want you to celebrate in the future Kayamim, like those days. So the word, it's not adding extra days of reading Megillah. It's telling you that the days in the future, Kayamim, will be like these days in their joy and in their halachot. Lidorot hu dichtiv. Therefore, that was said for the future generations that would come. One last bit that I wanted to share before we wrap up for today, and that is that this idea of 11, 12, 13, much of it is not actually relevant anymore. And the conversation that we have, what day it falls out on, because once we have a set calendar, Purim can never actually fall out on Shabbat. Okay? So some of the things that we found, that was relevant in the time when they were being Mekadesh Chodesh by the moon, so the day, it could fall out on any day. Okay? But now, today, there are multiple days that Purim could never fall out on. So therefore, the idea of 11, 12, 13 is not as shayach.
It doesn't apply to today anyway, because today, you mentioned, let's say, for example, Brooklyn to deal.
Yeah.
Worst comes to worst, we catch it. Also, my biggest problem about this whole Gemara here is it doesn't sound like it's so machmir hearing the Megillah when you give somebody a 4-day opportunity to make it.
So we'll see when we get to it why a person's able to do it. But what you have to remember is, either according to the first understanding or according to the second understanding, whichever way you go, the same rabbis that told you 14, 15 also told you 11, 12, 13. So if we were sitting here on the outside after Megillah and we were being like, you know what, 14, 15, Hazaku Baruch, we're going to stretch it for you. That's being Mekil, that's lessening it. But when the actual source of it comes from the same people, they gave you a 5-day window to be able to do it. You know what the example is? There's certain things that a person has to do. Let's say we have a custom to do machatzita shekel. When do we start doing machatzita shekel? When could you do it till? Yeah. So you have the whole month to do it. So it's not that you were being not stringent. That whole month is its time. Rabotai, we should be zocheh to carry on. This first day, as I said, this first daf is a little bit more technical, but after that it gets super interesting. Hazak Baruch to everyone that's on the Zoom. I don't know how many do we have here. I can't see if it's a... Yeah, question.